There's a whole range of different people are at different levels, and there's different kinds of intelligence, and it's not something that we say, it's just woven into the fabric of the community.
Hi, and welcome to another episode of Learning by Living, the podcast about people who learn or work outside of conventional schools. Our guest today, Hope Wilder, is the founder of Pathfinder Community School, a learning community where kids truly learn by living. A lifelong learner herself, Hope had an accelerated experience of a public school system, graduating from the University of South Carolina at the age of 19 with degrees in biology and German. For the dozen years before starting Pathfinder, she worked and played as an alternative outdoor educator and science teacher at private schools and local nonprofits. Hope, Kevin, and I sat down to talk about Hope's experience watching kids learn through freedom and play, and what can happen when learners are truly in charge. Full disclosure, Kevin's also a member of Pathfinder's board of directors, where he currently serves as board president. We hope you enjoy the episode.
Hey, Hope. How you doing?
Doing good.
Hi, Hope.
Hi, Gina.
So Hope and I know each other, and I guess I should say this before we start anything. We're both on the board of directors of the Pathfinder Community School, which we'll get into a little bit, and that's something that was spearheaded by Hope, and we'll definitely get into all this. But first, Hope, who are you? Tell the listeners kind of who you are.
So I'm Hope Wilder. I live in Durham, North Carolina, and I've been in education, alternative education, for the past 15 years. I'm also the founder of Pathfinder Community School.
Well, let's talk about this first then, your background, because you've been kind of involved in alternative education for a while. So you taught at Duke Gardens, nature and science. So let's start there. And then slowly self-directed education came on your radar.
Sure. So I'd been doing outdoor education and in all different kinds of settings. At Duke Gardens, I was working on field trips, enrichment programs, in-school programs, and also I spearheaded a homeschool program there. And I'd worked extensively with homeschoolers, including unschoolers, for a long time. So that was kind of my favorite program. And I was invited to go to like an enrichment conference. At the conference, I heard Dr. Peter Gray speak about self-directed learning. And actually, I don't know if I've told you this, Kevin, but the first time I heard him talk, it really bothered me. He said some things that kind of got under my skin. And I felt myself, after the talk, just really thinking over the things he said, especially about self-directed education and technology, because my whole job was kind of keeping kids away from computers and going outside, all that kind of thing. And I got his book, and after I read it and I got to the part about Sudbury schools, I just felt like, why has nobody ever told me about this? I have to go to one of these schools, or I need to start one now. And it just felt like, this is what I'm going to do with my life.
And for those of our guests who don't know, I guess I should just explain, although probably most of our listeners know, Sudbury schools are, I guess, schools in the very loose sense of the word, where they don't have any formal or, I guess, enforced curriculum. There's nothing that kids have to do outside of chores in some of the meetings, and they kind of do what they want with their time. So for any listeners who don't know what those are.
Yeah, and after that point, I started letting go more and more of the curriculum as much as I was able to at Duke Gardens. But I found that even though I wanted to give children freedom to pursue what they were interested in, we were still bound by the North Carolina curriculum that teachers came to Duke Gardens to learn for their kids. Like, they came with a specific agenda in mind. So I remember a specific day where I was walking with a kid, and the kid said, like, can't I just look at what I want to look at? And I was like, oh no, you can't. I have to tell you about insects today. So whether you like it or not, it's time to learn about 6 legs, head, thorax, abdomen, and I just felt so depressed by that. I decided, I kind of made a vow to just never teach somebody again who didn't want to learn what I was teaching. And that's really what directly led me to founding Pathfinder.
I think in a previous conversation you and I had, you explained it as, I felt like the forced curriculum was the price kids had to pay to be able to play with all the cool stuff.
Exactly. That was their ticket, their admission price to coming outside and having a field trip.
I always think it's interesting that the aha moment, right? And like what that leads to. So after that aha moment, what happened?
Oh, I became obsessed with everything about self-directed education. I started studying Sudbury schools. I got the Sudbury Valley School starter kit secondhand from another school that had closed, and I picked that founder's brains. I just read everything on the internet, books, and I started visiting places. So I visited, I want to say 7 or 8 other self-directed learning centers or schools. I also interned at a Sudbury school for a couple months in Baltimore, Arts and Ideas Sudbury School, just so I knew that I needed to live the practice to make sure that I really believed in it and that it was congruent with my values. So that was an amazing learning journey that I went to over the course of 2 years.
So was it a life shift or just an academic shift?
Oh, it was a life shift. I mean, at some point I had to quit my job and I devoted myself to founding Pathfinder full time.
That's amazing.
What was that like seeing all of these different schools that don't have this forced curriculum when you were kind of used to a background where you were kind of forcing kids into a curriculum? Were there any parts of it that like really excited you or any parts of it that made you uncomfortable?
Yeah, I mean, I think seeing the kids just being so themselves was and still is intensely exciting to me. It's like getting to see an athlete in a flow state of consciousness, just seeing people pursuing what they want to pursue and being so all I can say is just being themselves. You can tell by their faces that they're not hiding anything. They're not constructing a false self, that they're just living in the moment and reacting to what's going on around them. So that was really exciting to me, especially my first week or so at Arts and Ideas Sudbury School. And I'd say the biggest thing that bothered me was that how little kids needed me. I came in thinking, oh, I have so much to offer them. I'm a cool person. I know how to do fun kid stuff. And then the kids were just like, we're busy right now. Like, no, thank you. We don't want to do your fun cello offering. No, we don't want to do your fun sewing offering. Like, no, we really can't be bothered right now because we have busy lives. But I sort of had to have a little bit of ego loss there, just kind of realizing that respecting the kids' agenda was what I was there for.
How funny, because I at first thought you said how little kids needed me, meaning little kids and
Oh
how they need
no.
you. I
How,
know, it's how little kids need me.
yeah.
Yeah. Now that I guess I'm kind of cheating here because I've heard you tell so many interesting stories, so I want to take this opportunity to get you to retell some of these because they're really interesting. One of the stories is the kid who wanted to know about the stock market, and then the other story that I just love is the kid who was building a secret garden.
Oh yeah. So like you'll have to remind me about the secret garden one. The stock market one. So I was sitting around at Arts and Ideas actually, and a lot of time teenagers especially are just kind of poking around on their phones and it's hard to see any quote unquote learning happening. But I saw like a 15-year-old or so turned to a 13-year-old and said, "Hey, what's the stock market?" And I was sitting there like ready to jump in with, a long, complicated answer. And the 13-year-old just said, "It's where people put their money. And when it goes up, it's good because you're making money. And when it goes down, it's bad because you're losing money." And then the 15-year-old was just like, "Oh,
That's
okay."
it.
Yeah. And went back to reading. I don't know if they were reading news or something where they needed the context of what the stock market is. And it just reminded me that learning is happening all the time and everybody is a source of information. Everybody's a source of learning.
And what's so interesting to me about that story, and the reason I love it when I hear it, is it was a 15-year-old or so turning to someone that you're pretty positive it sounds like was younger than that person,
Yeah.
right? And like how casually that was. It didn't seem like anyone in the room thought that it would be unusual that a 15-year-old would ask the 13-year-old that happens to be next to them.
No, and what to me, I think the most refreshing thing about self-directed learning environments is the complete lack of shame around ignorance. So there's no there's no like, oh, you should know that already. It's just like everyone has a right to ask questions and to be curious about whatever they're curious about. And I've noticed in a lot of classroom environments, kids being more embarrassed about asking questions. Whereas by and large in self-directed environments, I just see kids asking whatever they want, whenever they want, and, being able to learn so much that way.
Yeah, I think that's especially true with older kids, right? Older kids in classroom situations get that shame. So asking questions is a little bit taboo and a little bit risky.
Yeah.
And in self-directed learning environments, it's the exact opposite. That's such a great point.
Well, then of course it's not the teacher often has a time frame that they're supposed to stick with. So even though I know that the teacher might want to answer questions, but oftentimes teachers don't feel like they can, like, that's too off topic. We'll do that later, or you can figure out that on your own. But I guess kids probably get the message. Well, I probably shouldn't really be asking these questions. I should just follow the teacher's calendar.
And also, it's the peer thing. I think when you're with a group of self directed peers who know that asking questions and curiosity is okay, it becomes really just like what you do during the day. And I think that what I see in high schools and middle schools is when questioning happens in a classroom, it's almost the peers that want to quell the questioning for whatever reason.
Mm-hmm.
And then the secret garden story. So that's the story where a girl and her friends decided they wanted to build a secret garden. So they started using tools and lumber.
Oh,
and
yeah.
stuff.
That's now I'm remembering, and that's happened at least twice because it's happened at Pathfinder now too, which is kind of a
Oh gosh. Okay.
a cool synchronicity. But yeah, I just remember this group of kids saying, "Let's go build a secret garden." And the funny thing about it was right in the middle of everything, so it wasn't very secret at all. But yeah, they were using saws and hammers, and the general rule at Arts and Ideas was like you're in charge of your body, and you have to check the tools in and out. You get some basic safety instructions, but there's no adult making sure that you're not going to cut yourself. There's nobody supervising right there. And to me, seeing these kids just confidently, you know, putting together this stuff from this like weird junkyard, um, it was very much like at an adventure playground. And I could see how much there's like this magical glow about things when kids are imagining how it could be. And seeing it take shape, and not just seeing the literal garden itself, but also like what they thought of the garden as, what it could be, how it occupied this huge place in their imaginations. It was just really magical. And now at Pathfinder, the same thing has started happening, especially after I've been gardening, and I've been planting vegetables and flowers with the kids. Then they started making little gardens everywhere. I would turn around and see moss and berries and flowers, with a little ring of sticks around them. And the kids will water them and be like, come look at my garden. So there's like a monkey see, monkey do aspect to it too.
So, Hope, why do people choose Pathfinder?
We might want to get into what Pathfinder is first, and then kind of get into the why.
So Pathfinder is a self-directed learning community for ages 5 to 14. It's located in Durham, North Carolina. And the things that are really unique about Pathfinder is that it's completely self-directed, as in the kids get to choose what they learn, who they learn it from, when, where, how. And also, it's a self-governing environment, and we use various governance tools, including one called Sociocracy that's consent-based, where everyone in the community, from the parents, the kids, the staff, to the board, everyone has a voice in how decisions are made about the community. And I'd say what that looks like on a day-to-day basis is that the kids collectively are in charge of how the building is used. We have about 14 different rooms, large rooms and small rooms with different purposes. The kids are completely in charge of what rules they want that govern the behavior in those rooms. And also they get about $200 a month of program supply budget that they're completely in control of.
See, again, I feel like I'm cheating because I know all the stories. So
Yeah.
I'm going to ask you to bring up two of those in relation to the governance thing, because it's interesting that like kids have an equal voice as the adults. So the cursing policy and the chore policy are probably like the two that always come to my mind. These are really interesting stories.
I also really want to know about that program supply thing.
Okay, I'll start with cursing, and then you'll have to remind me what's next. So the funny thing is the cursing policy came up from a kid who was saying crap repeatedly, actually. And it came up in a culture committee, which is kind of a peer mediation group. And one of the kids said, I've been really offended by cursing from this other member. And we were all like taking it, super seriously. And we're like, well, what did they say? And he said, well, it was CRAP. And we're all like, mm-hmm. And then he said, well, it's not so much the word. It was that he was saying it over and over again. And he didn't stop when I said stop. So it turned into this conversation about like what is appropriate. And we talked about it as a community. We sent it out to our breakout groups. So we have breakout groups we call spawns for each age group. The little kids, the medium age kids, and the older kids, basically. And each group talked about when is it okay to say swear words and when is it not okay to say swear words? How do you feel when people say curse words? And even what do you consider a curse word? And after much conversation and much deliberation, the member circle, which has representatives from each of those groups, made a cursing policy that's basically no cursing in public spaces, and public spaces is any room without a door, including outside. But it's okay to curse in a room with a closed door if everyone in the room consents to it. And what's really interesting is that it's not limited by age. So when we first enforced this policy, you would hear the little kids go into a room, close the door, and then just start yelling out swear words for the sheer joy of it. And I would knock on the door and say, excuse me, I can hear you in the public room, which means that this is not private. Like, you need to modulate your voice so that it's just carrying inside the room. And I'd say after the initial kind of glee of being able to use curse words, the kids have toned it down a lot, and that they're really aware of what offends people. And we have conversations like all the time about things like hate speech or what kinds of words are just not acceptable in our space because they're derogatory against different groups of people. And different kids or different families have different values and are also offended by slightly different things. And the kids grow to be very sensitive of who feels strongly about what, as well as they're extremely adept at cursing in terms of knowing when and where, how and why cursing is appropriate. And I'll say lastly, but not least, that having this policy has also really freed the adults up, because I'd say that it's natural in a professional environment and in a public environment not to swear, but there's something about swearing that increases intimacy and closeness and sharing. At certain times, certain places, it can be like a really funny joke. And I'd say that the adults use the policy in the same way that the kids do. And I just find that really interesting, that there seems to be this human desire to use language creatively.
Yeah, it's funny because I always say that my son's 4, and I always say that I don't really care if he learns to curse. I'm not averse to that. I'm just averse to him being able to curse like he would use other language. I want him to do it well.
Right.
So
I was watching context.
Yeah. I mean, I was watching a documentary series about Watergate and the situations that led up to Watergate. And for those who have heard Richard Nixon's private tapes of the recordings, like there was a lot of cursing there. And so there's adults, like the president of the United States is cursing.
Yeah.
So it doesn't seem like it would be a big deal to if you're going to learn about history of Watergate, it's going to be hard to do it without being exposed to some level of cursing if you want to listen to the Nixon tapes.
Right.
So the other story was the story about the day that the group decided sociocratically that they were not going to do chores?
Oh, yeah. The day without chores. So we've had one member especially who's just really for a long time dug in their heels about chore time, which is a requirement for everybody to pitch in at the end of the day. And so we decided with sociocracy, there's a way of making decisions we call good enough for now, safe enough to try. So we decided that it was safe enough to try one day with no chores. And it really threw everybody off. So chore time came and we said, nope, don't do your chores today. We're trying out this idea from this one kid to not do chores to see if they're necessary. Like it was like a scientific experiment. Are chores necessary in order to have a healthy, safe environment? Then when we came back the next day, it was a disaster. There was like little Kleenexes all over the floor and like gross gobs of food in the eating zone and just dirt everywhere and mess in the art room. And the interesting thing is there were some visitors who were coming, like new prospective people who are checking Pathfinder out. And I told the kids as they were coming in, I was like, just observe the environment and remember we're going to check in about how did it go the day without chores. And once we got to the check-in, I had people raise their hands and just share, like, how do you feel about how the environment is this morning? And kids were like, it's gross, it's disgusting, it's nasty. And then I asked the visitors, what kind of impression did the space make on you with this, level of cleanliness? And they were like, well, I didn't really know what was normal here, but I did think it was kind of messy. They were being polite. And then overwhelmingly, the group voted to keep chore time because they were like, we want the space to feel nice. Like we want it to feel, to be clean enough, to not be gross. And interestingly, the member who hates chore time has since been elected a chore checker and is really on board now because I think just the idea that we could change it, that we could drop it, that it's not just a rule coming down from the adults on high, but it's really the whole community considering deeply, like, do we need this practice? And when we tried it out, it was like, oh yeah, definitely. Like, and I think that some people just don't see mess or don't care about it, but they're willing to pitch in for the sake of everybody else who is affected by the mess. So.
I guess on the chore topic, I should say also that there was a several day period that when I spent at Pathfinder, and everyone who's there, including visitors, if you're there for the day, you're doing chores because you're part of the team that day. And what was really interesting was that the chore checker, the one who kind of supervises the chores in a various region of the place, the chore checker for me, I think was about 10 or 11. And he showed me how to do the chores that I was supposed to do. And then he checked them at the end. He said, Kevin, you're good. Right. And it didn't feel like it was this abnormal thing.
Yeah.
It didn't feel like the tenure, like he got probably a little kick out of it, but at the same time, it didn't really feel like it was out of the ordinary or out of the normal.
Right. Because just because you're an adult, you're just another person. And just because he's a kid doesn't mean that he has less authority than you do. Especially in the realm of chores, he had more authority than you do because he was a chore checker.
Yeah.
So obviously this is a really different environment for learning. And so why would people choose Pathfinder? Why do people choose Pathfinder?
I'd say people fall into roughly 3 groups. One group of people is people who are passionate about self-directed education and who are actively seeking it in community, because they're philosophically aligned with I'd say fundamentally letting their kids be free. But people come to self-directed education for all different kinds of reasons. So sometimes what freedom is can mean very different things to different people. That's maybe a larger discussion. Then a second group of people we have are homeschoolers who are looking for community. So they might not be completely on board with the lack of curriculum, but they want socialization and they want their kids to learn how to play with other kids. We get a lot of people who really care deeply about social emotional development, and I'd say we do have a curriculum. The curriculum is community, and part of learning to live in community is learning how to communicate about your feelings and learning how to navigate conflict. That's something that we spend an enormous amount of time on through mediation practice and also through proactively teaching social skills. And then the third group of people we call desperados, and it's people who are just desperate for something, anything different, and people whose children are really suffering in the environment that they're in, and they find Pathfinder to be a complete breath of fresh air and a place where their kids can just relax and really be themselves and tune in to what their own interests and passions are, especially if they've been in an environment that's been hurtful to them in some way.
Can we talk a little bit about the third group? Because again, I'm cheating. I know I'm bringing in all the stories that I know about, but right. So there have been some kids who've come to us after going to a conventional school, and they came to Pathfinder, and it took them a little while but they really found their footing, and they found kind of what they're interested in, and they started being more active and more social. Can we, without naming names, can we tell a few of those stories? Because those stories are pretty incredible.
Yeah. I mean, we've had kids come in who, well, I'll tell one story in particular. There's a kid who came in who is on the spectrum and who really had a hard time with bullying and just terrible experiences from having misunderstood social cues, really. And this kid came in and within a couple months was just completely integrated into the social environment. And I call Pathfinder social boot camp. This kid's mom came to me and was like, it's night and day before and after Pathfinder. She's crying in the parking lot telling me this has changed their lives forever, and that she felt like his diagnosis was not going to hold him back from having relationships with people. And that's what she felt was most important in his life, that before then he hadn't had really deep friendships with people. And I think overcoming that barrier, learning concrete social skills, learning empathy and learning how to read people's faces, learning all these things that were challenging being non-neurotypical. And then at the end of the day, just completely going with the flow. We've had kids come who were severely depressed and who just blossomed in terms of going from not being engaged with life really and being really shut down. We've had kids who I would say, who had been scarred by not learning at the same time as everybody else and being labeled as deficient somehow, either by grades or tests or somehow being seen. We've had kids who have identified with, I'm less than other people because I'm not as good at reading, or I'm not as good as math, and internalizing that to saying I'm dumb. And kids like that especially have come and seen, oh, there's a whole range of different people are at different levels, and there's different kinds of intelligence. And it's not something that we say, it's just woven into the fabric of the community, that it's like, it's okay to be who you are, and it's okay to be where you are. And, people here care about you, and they care about you as a person, and nobody's going to label you or evaluate you or say that you're less than because you're learning differently in some dimension. And so seeing kids like that just blossom into having friends, having interests, and seeing, for me, it's really about seeing the spark come alive in kids' eyes again, where there's just this certain something where it's like they've connected to joy in their lives again after having disconnected from joy. And it's a very tangible difference, at least to me.
Has there been challenges in running a self-directed school like Pathfinder?
Yes, and mostly not what you would expect. Most of our challenges have been from outside forces that have nothing to do with our learning philosophy or our methodology or anything like that. So um, I think they're challenges of probably any school or any small business. We had the building flooded one time. We had the water turn off and we had to flush the toilets with buckets. Closings due to hurricanes, tornadoes, various viruses. When we're going through COVID-19 right now, we're closed for the next 2 months by order of the governor. So we're struggling with that along with everybody else.
But the cool thing is that we were able to poll members and their parents to see what sort of offerings Pathfinder does that we can replicate online. And at least as we speak right now, which is, I guess, April 3rd, we have kind of an online thing, and kids, of course, can attend if they would like. So Pathfinder is going on during this time, but
the building is closed. The program is still operational, and we're all being flexible and just rolling with the punches.
So I'm particularly interested in online education. So what does this online thing look like?
It's really different from probably most other online education because it's self-directed online education. So in the morning we have morning meeting and the kids can suggest what kinds of offerings they'd like for the day. The offerings happen every hour on the hour from 11 a.m., 11, 12, 1, 2 p.m. And then there's cleanup time at 2:50, where Angie cleans something in her house. She's our program director. And the kids are invited to clean something in their own houses too. And the offerings have been art time. So that's where they all draw together or do other creative projects. And not even talking to each other, but just being on a video chat and making things and sharing what they're making with each other as a kind of parallel play. I've also seen, we've done show and tell. I did karaoke time. They do just hanging out, like everybody meeting up for lunch and talking, chit-chatting, because that's what people do when we're at Pathfinder. There's offerings like art or music or building something that looks like a project. And then there's a lot of hanging out and a lot of free play. The way that kids have found to play with each other is through a Minecraft server. So we just started up a Pathfinder Minecraft server. The kids want to use their program supply budget to pay for the server. And it's only been like 3 days, but this village has just blossomed in this Minecraft world. There's like rainbow houses and houses with towers and little tiny houses with 3 beds and 2 cows and a pig. So the kids' imaginations are just going wild as they're interacting online in this imaginary world together. And that's really cool to see.
That's so awesome. I want to know more about the project supply budget.
Mm-hmm. So the kids get $200 a month, and they can use it on anything from field trips to art supplies, office supplies. We go through so much Scotch tape, and I can't even tell you like the kinds of things the kids are making with Scotch tape. I'm like, well, if you're willing to pay for it, sure, you can like make a gigantic sculpture out of Scotch tape and construction paper. Those are
and they learned. Sorry, they learned at some point. What they went to some kind of like I guess trampoline park, and if I remember the story correctly, they sort of learned that it costs a heck of a lot of money for everyone to go to a place. And they got a little bit more kind of conservative with how they spend their money when they're going to places for that reason, if I remember right.
Yeah, that's true. And it's also, they decided to fully pad one of our rooms. It's called the Rumpus Room. So it started out empty with like a gym mat. And then now it's like there's gym mats on 3 of the walls. There's tons of cushions. There's a yoga ball. There, for a while, there was a little mini trampoline because they were like, that's cheaper than going to the trampoline park. And it's just a place where they can literally bounce off the walls. And I love it because it's like when you give kids money and power, what do they do with it? They build a padded room.
So cool.
They can jump around in, and it's like pillow forts all day, every day, and sword fighting. It's where the rumpus happens.
So, how do kids learn in this environment? I'll just play the kind of the skeptical parent who's going to come in and say, "Okay, but that's good, but my child needs to learn math."
I was going to say,
social studies,
I'm assuming when you say how do they learn, there's a silent academics in there.
Well, okay, so just for listeners, we'll let you in on kind of an inside secret that Hope and I like to say that whenever we're doing PR work, we have to search for what we call learning pictures. Pictures where the learning is obvious, right? Like they're doing stuff that looks like learning, because there's so many times that we feel like they're learning, but it's not obvious if you just look at a picture.
Right. And I'll say, so you want to do math today?
Yeah. I mean, whatever stuff you see that you would tell like skeptical parents, if a parent said, but how are they learning stuff here?
Right.
What are the stories?
So amongst our older kids, there's a group of kids who one day out of nowhere said, please teach us algebra. And Angie was like, wow, I've been waiting forever for a kid to say, please teach me math. And so she got out books and Khan Academy and all this stuff. And she was like, but why is it that you want to learn algebra? And they said, well, we want to take the SAT and to get into college, to get a good job, because we want to get an apartment and we know we need money to pay rent. And to pay rent, we need a job, and we think probably it would be a good idea to like take the SAT. So it was a line of reasoning that came from the kids for their own goals that they had, and they knew that if they asked an adult would help them, which I think is really important in a self-directed learning environment. And they knew what they wanted to learn, so it was like easy peasy. I've also seen kids teach themselves algebra. There was another kid who was into computer programming, and I would see him doing algebra on his own on the whiteboard all the time. I was glad he never asked me for help because algebra is not my strong suit. I would be like, go to YouTube, but he never needed adult help. He was, just trekking along, doing his own thing. And I see the little kids teach each other. They do school. They play school together, and whoever knows the most about something is the teacher. So, or sometimes not. Sometimes the teacher will do a problem wrong, and then a quote-unquote student will say, no, that's not 4 plus 10 is 14, not 12. or whatever. Anybody can speak up to correct the teacher, which is really fun. And for reading, I see it's an intensely literate environment, and there's a lot of math going on too. With our program supply budget, the kids learn business math. They can run their own businesses, and we've had kids, learn everything about, capital to profit margins, everything about running a small business through selling candy to each other. And I've also seen kids, they learn how to estimate how much something costs because we're buying stuff all the time, and they know, if we're going to get snacks for the whole community for a month, that's going to cost about $50. If we go to the trampoline gym with everybody together, that's about $200. Scotch tape is about $5. Like they know how much these things cost because we talk about it all the time. And then the environment itself has lots of signs, and there's language everywhere. So I've seen kids learn how to read, starting out with their own names, then going to their friends' names. Like if a little kid who doesn't know how to read is a chore checker, they just look at the first letter of everybody's names to check everyone off. And then gradually I see them learn how to read the whole name of each person. They know what it sounds like, so they can figure it out pretty easily. And then I've seen the kids, I don't know if I've told you this, Kevin, but I've seen little kids in packs reading in secret to each other.
Oh, no, you didn't tell me that.
In forts or in the play area, whoever knows how to read, it's like they have this magical power that the other kids don't have. So they're fascinated by it. And then the ones who know how to read are also proud of it. So I've seen small children, 5, 6, 7 years old, reading to each other, but secretly, because they don't want the adults to make a big deal out of it. And when I've asked them one time, and they were like, "Yeah, we didn't want anybody to come start teaching us."
Wow.
Like, as if teaching is something that you do to people. They were like, "No, we don't want people to come do that to us." And they were like, "We just want to learn by ourselves." And then I've seen kids learn through Junior Scrabble. I've seen them learn just by pulling books off the shelf and reading them. It's like learning happens all the time. It's everywhere.
I mean, the learning story I always appreciated was Ghost Club, because that actually started, again, when I was there for a few-day period hanging out in the space. I remember like the germinations of Ghost Club, and that became a pretty, I guess, intense thing for several kids.
Yeah, I mean, and I'm curious about which part of the learning do you mean? Because there was definitely a lot of learning in terms of kids finding the edge of what was terrifying to them and then backing off of that edge. So finding the edge of what scares them really deeply, like bad scared, versus a kind of thrilling good scared. But I also saw kids, you've never seen so many, The Legend of Sleepy Hollow was out, and all of our books about paranormal stuff in the library was out. And kids are looking things up on the internet to scare each other with. It was a funny time.
I mean, the one I remember is that kids started to kind of like read the like literature on ghosts and stuff like that.
They were the ones who could read became kind of ghost experts.
Yeah. And then the other story that I remember is that besides having a really thrilling conversation with one of the kids there one day about whether ghosts exist, and I played the skeptic role. No, they don't exist, and here's why. And he was trying to convince me, and I was trying to convince him. But I also remember that they started going from room to room to figure out if the rooms were haunted.
Yeah.
And one of the kids downloaded an app that would tell you if a room was haunted.
They're all haunted.
And then at some point, another kid says, "Hey, wait, like, how do we know that this app is accurate?" So they came up with the idea that another one would download a different ghost, app on their phone, and they would compare the results.
Yeah.
Right? So if they got discrepant results, they realized, okay, well, we don't know who to trust. So it's it was really a burgeoning scientific experiment that just played out like in front of our eyes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love it when that happens.
Obviously we know students can learn all the time in all different ways, and that there doesn't have to be a set curriculum to do so. I'm most interested, I think, in parent perspective. I think Hope talked a little about that, as well as, how long has Pathfinder?
2 years. The doors have been open for 2 years.
So in terms of alumni and outcomes, we don't know yet is the answer.
We only have one. I think now we're up to about 3 kids who have aged out of the program, because we go through 14, and people age out basically when they feel like they're ready to. They're welcome to stay past 14 if the program is still enriching for them, and I'd love to grow up to age 18. And the 14-year-old, one of them started interning at a software development company while enrolled at Pathfinder 1 day a week, and that was an apprenticeship program that we set up. And this is a kid who went from being quote unquote addicted to Minecraft to learning coding in Minecraft to doing very advanced computer science work. And now, he's learned, I think, 7 programming languages, and he hangs out at this software office, 3 days a week, and is a resource for the 35-year-old, 30 plus
Love it.
software engineers who work there, because he has all this time to do all this research, and they're working. So he'll come up, and my husband works at this company, and he'll tell me stories like, "Oh yeah, today this kid helped me with this problem I was having with like security issues, and We worked on this thing together, closing up this back door, and I have no idea what they're talking about, but I'm like, I'm so happy. I'm so happy that I saw what I did. My role in this was seeing the kids' interest and saying, I really don't know how to help you with that, but I know people who do, and I'm going to connect you to those people.
So now that Pathfinder has been in existence for 2 years, what are the biggest lessons you feel like you've learned about kids, about self-directed learning from the experience?
I feel like if I was to summarize, the negative way to say it is don't squish them. But I guess the positive way would be to just say letting kids be kids has been one of the most rewarding things that I could ever do. And I feel like Pathfinder is like this protective bubble where we just let the kids grow naturally. And I think the other thing that's really changed for me personally is how I view the role between adults and children, and what does respectful facilitation look like. And for me, I went from when I was a teacher, I thought respectful facilitation is I give information, they receive it. Then I went through kind of a very strong Sudbury phase where I was like, adults have no role in children's lives and they should just figure it out for themselves. And then I've kind of swayed back to a middle ground, and the middle ground that I've found is like that I feel that my role is to pay attention to children and also to just shower them with affection, to be present, but I think being present, mindful, and paying attention.